So, dear colleagues, comrades, and friends, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to see you all. My name is Marina. I'm one of the editors of Post-Marxist Studies, a collective of young scholars promoting contemporary critical theory from a post-Marxist perspective. Our main goal is to create a network that is open to global scholars and activists and to raise the issues that are currently silenced in Russian academia and public sphere. We insist that overcoming dark times is only possible through cooperation and through practices of solidarity, and we prove this by our own example. We're celebrating our third anniversary this year and have prepared a special program to mark the occasion. And it is a great honor for me today to welcome our distinguished guest, Professor Yanis Varaufakis, an internationally renowned economist, academic, and influential public intellectual. Professor Varaufakis' extensive scholarship spans several fields, including political economy, game theory, and economic philosophy. Today, Professor Varaufakis will share his insights on the rise of technofeudalism, exploring how digital technologies and corporate structures are reshaping global power dynamics. He will also address the phenomenon of rising right-wing populism around the world, with a particular focus on recent developments in Russia. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Professor Yanis Varaufakis, and dear Professor, the floor is yours.
Marina, thank you so much for the kind invitation, the exuberant introduction. Thank you for all doing what you do, because such study groups, whatever it is that you call yourselves, think tanks, whatever, are essential in this very bleak day and age where ideas have been commodified and marshaled along the battle lines, not of ideas per se, but battle lines which are destroying our soul and, unfortunately, the bodies of too many people to count. Never before has the Marxist tradition been so relevant and necessary, while at the same time, never before has it been so sidelined by what passes as the intelligentsia, not only in the West, but also in Russia, even in China. There is a minority of Marxists in the Chinese Communist Party. Very good people, but a minority nevertheless. Now, all my life, allow me something of an autobiographical note to warm all of us up. All my life I resisted labels. I always knew I was a Marxist, but judging by who else called themselves Marxists, I didn't want to be associated with that crowd because I could see that Marx didn't deserve it. Marx deserved better than all of us together. Primarily because Marx was utterly non-dogmatic. Once I described myself, and that became quite viral. I didn't think it was going to be viral, but it became viral. I described myself as an erratic and inconsistent Marxist. And, mainly Marxists attacked me fiercely. And the point I was trying to make was that the only way of being a Marxist is by being erratic, because Marx was erratic. Read his stuff. There's no article, book, pamphlet that he wrote in which he doesn't say in his introduction that he disagrees very strongly with what he had written earlier. Now, if you're not erratic, if you're not, if you try to find a thread which is totally consistent in the thinking of anybody, including Einstein, whoever, and you think that this is evidence of the greatness of the thinker, essentially what you're doing is you're utterly misunderstanding the process of creating knowledge, of creating theories, of creating hypotheses, and working through them. If you look at Das Kapital, Volume 1, as we all know, it clashes with Volume 2, and Volume 3 effectively junks the whole thing. Even within the same book, you have inconsistencies, which are simply reflections of the inconsistencies of capitalism, which is what Marx was trying to explain. If you look at the thesis on Feuerbach, or the economic and philosophical manuscripts, you get a very dialectical view of history, which is almost absent in Capital. Because in Capital, Marx had already been infected by the political economy of Adam Smith, of David Ricardo, and so on. He was trying to put things in schemas of reproduction and to mathematize it. When you try to mathematize dialectical thought, you end up with non-dialectical thought, even if you really want it to be dialectical. But that struggle is essential. And, having an open mind about your own ideas and allowing yourself to be inconsistent, a degree of inconsistency, is absolutely essential, because the whole capitalist project is so utterly inconsistent. If you think about it, even in Adam Smith, the great economist that Marx copied to such a great extent intentionally. He took the Adam Smith model, which was a celebration of capitalism, of free market mechanisms, and he said, okay, right, I'll accept that this is how the world works. But then I'm going to find inconsistencies within Adam Smith. And then I'm going to expose the inconsistencies and show that if you follow his own logic, then you will come to the conclusion that capitalism is a very problematic system, a system that generates crisis just as much as it generates productivity, the division of labor, and so on. Now, I'm getting on in years. In my mid-60s now, and the older I get, the happier I am with the label Marxist. I'm not happy with the word post-Marxist. I'm actually not happy with the word post being attached to anything. Postmodernism is a complete nightmare. It's a total annulment of what good things modernity brought to us. Post-Keynesianism, Keynes is spinning in his grave at 5,000 revs a minute whenever he hears post-Keynesian talk. Post-Marxism, I don't know, you will tell me in the discussion why you need to call yourself post-Marxist. I respect that. But I don't see the point. Because, Marx was a post-Marxist every day. Every day, as I said, he disagreed with what he had said the previous day, or even the very same day. But, since Marina was kind enough to mention my last book, Technofeodalism, allow me to reflect a little bit on that. The subtitle of the book is one that is very deeply hated by most Marxists. The subtitle is very provocative. It's not aimed at being provocative, or maybe a little bit, but it reflects what I really think. The subtitle is, so the title is Technofeudalism, the subtitle is What Killed Capitalism. So I've had numerous Marxists attack me viciously. As a Marxist, this is the greatest dialectical contradiction. The right are much happier to engage with my hypothesis. The anti-Marxist right, like Steve Bannon, has taken my book and has turned it into his main go-to source in order to attack Elon Musk in the internal fight within the Trumpian or Trumpist movement. But Marxists hate it. And look, I understand why. And the reason why they do is was explained to me so beautifully by a Trotskyist academic, a very nice guy from the University of Westminster, I think, in Britain, who said to me, but Yanis, if what you're saying is right, and capital overthrew capitalism, because this is the main hypothesis in my book, that capital became so triumphant, so toxic, that it mutated like a stupid virus that mutates and kills its host, like the Ebola virus, which doesn't spread very far because it's so toxic it kills the human beings that carry it. That's the main point of my argument, that capital has been so successful that it mutated into a new form of capital, which I call cloud capital, which has created something worse than capitalism. So, if I'm right, history answered Rosa Luxemburg's famous question, socialism or barbarism, with one word, barbarism. which takes the form of a socioeconomic exploitative system based on a new form of capital, which I call cloud capital, which has replaced markets with cloud thieves, Amazon, Alibaba, and so on. And it has replaced capitalist profit with a new form of rent, which I call cloud rent. That's so this guy from the University of Westminster, very nice Trotskyist lecturer, said to me, "But Yanis, if capitalism has overthrown itself, what on earth are we doing? We came to this planet to overthrow capitalism. Now what do we do?" Which I understand. I understand. Steve Bannon and the rightists who read my book don't have a problem with that. We leftists, I spent all my life dreaming of us all getting together with trade unions, with social movements and so on, and overthrowing capitalism. And now I can see that it has overthrown itself, and it's extremely sad, especially given that what it has created is far worse than capitalism itself. The reason why I'm saying that is because the antipathy and the venom that I see in the writings of very good Marxist thinkers who just loathe my book, far more so than the right do. It translates into their assumption that because I am saying that in the end it wasn't socialism that replaced capitalism, but it was technofeudalism, that I must not be a Marxist anymore. Which, of course, in the end, I mean, who cares what label we attach to ourselves, right? Except there is some degree of importance on answering the question, am I, for myself, right? I attach importance to it so that I understand my own thinking. Am I still a Marxist? And the answer I give is that I'm more of a Marxist now that I've put forward this hypothesis. Whether it's right or not or wrong is for you folks and for my readers to decide. But I feel more of a Marxist because what I did in order to come to this conclusion that we now live in a very different socioeconomic mode of production, not another phase of capitalism, but a new exploitative system, which is qualitatively different to capitalism. It relies on capital, just like capitalism did, but it's a new form of capital, which is profoundly and radically different from capital as we have known it. And the reason why I think this is important is because what I do in this book, and especially if you have the English edition, because it's coming out in Russian now, but I'm not sure what the translation is like. I'm always happy with my Russian translations and my Chinese translations because unfortunately I don't read Russian or Chinese. It's the Greek translations that irk me because I read them and I think, oh my God, this is terrible. Anyway, so in the appendix, I have an appendix in this book, which is for nerds. It's for people like you. It's not for the general public. The book is, I always try to write in a way that is perceptible and understandable by the general public who know nothing about Marx, know nothing about economics, because if we don't do that, then essentially it's a waste of effort. Academia is no longer capable of changing the world. It never was. I mean, Marx, maybe not out of choice, if he was significant because he didn't stay within the confines of academia, right? He was talking to workers, he was talking to intellectuals, he was talking to the general public. So in that appendix, however, I tried to write down my methodology, my Marxist method. How do I start from Marx? Okay, how do I take? What are the main Marxian concepts? The definition of value, of surplus value. How is value produced? How is it distributed under capitalism according to Marx? And then, once I have written down a concise version of the Marxian model of social reproduction, of distribution, of exchange, of production, of value. Once I've done that, I ask myself, okay, if I'm right that capital has mutated, And we have a new form of capital that didn't exist 10 years ago, not in Marx's time, 10 years ago. It's only about a decade old. And why am I saying that this is a completely different type of capital? Because capital has been evolving since we climbed down from the trees. Every capital good we ever produced, every produced means of production, was that. It was something we created, not because we wanted it, but because it helped us manufacture something else which we wanted. So if it's a plow, you produce a plow not because you want to admire it, but because you want to use it in order to cultivate the land, to produce wheat or corn or whatever. It's produced means of production. So whether this was a fishing rod in ancient times, or a steam engine, or a diesel engine, or today, an old singing, old dancing industrial robot that assembles automatically whole cars, all these are examples of capital goods, of produced means of production. Okay, so well before capitalism was even a figment of our imagination, capital was a produced means of production. What happens with the transformation, the great transformation from feudalism to capitalism, is that it is ownership of capital goods that becomes the source of wealth and power. Before that, it was the ownership of land, which translated into the accumulation of rents. With a shift from feudalism to capitalism, we have the shift of power from those who have their hands, who have property rights over land, to those who have property rights over machines, over capital goods. And that brings about capitalism. So my starting point is the political economy of Marx, which I try in the appendix, in the first part of the appendix, to just write down. I use some of my own terminology because I don't like the original terminology, but that's only window dressing. I do nothing except write down the basic principles of Marxian political economy. And then I throw in this mix the new form of capital, which I believe is a radical departure from capital as a produced means of production. Because what lives inside this machine that I'm speaking to you from, and you are listening to me from, but not just in the machine, primarily all the networks that connect us together, and especially when, Zoom, because we're using Zoom, whether we like it or not, it's a company, it is a capitalist company. They own this form of capital, which essentially what they do is they use algorithms to filter everything you and I say, and to essentially train itself, the algorithm, to train us, to train it, to train us, to train it to know us better. And then once it knows us better, not only does it target advertising, but it creates an interactive dialectical process between us. It's a process that you have with the algorithm of Amazon, for instance, that constantly learns from your whims, from your preferences, from where you click, where you don't click. It learns so that it can give you good advice, free good advice on what books to read, on what music to listen to through Spotify and so on. And then once it has grabbed your attention, because let's face it, when anything, people or machines give me good advice, say, buy this book, and then I buy it and I like it, and this keeps happening, then I will start trusting this machine, even if I know that it is just a dumb algorithm, because it is giving me good advice. Once it has captured my trust and my attention, then it can modify my behavior and do it in a way that traditional advertising could never do. Because, traditional advertiser, let's say, remember back in the day, even to this day, there is a billboard as you're driving your car. It shows you a Big Mac, McDonald's, horrible burger. And they have certain ways, they're very smart people, they've done their research, they're very creative. They make you want to buy this shitty burger. Okay? You don't want it, you don't need it, but still, at some point, you desire it. And that has been happening now for 100 years. This is not new. But what is new is that the production of that advertisement that used to be the result of the labor of somebody very talented, some advertiser. That's why in my book I refer to Don Draper, the fictitious character in Mad Men, the great serial, which I really enjoyed watching. Okay, who is half drunk most of the time, but he's brilliant like an artist. And he knows how to make you want to buy things that you neither need nor want. But this was human labor, right? That went into creating this creative advertisement that inputs desires into your heart. And back then, to this day, these analog, if you want, static advertisements, whether they are film or pictures or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's still static in the sense that it is one way. It's a one-way street. They think of the advertisement, they project it, broadcast it. It goes into my head, into my ears, my eyes, into my senses. It changes my behavior, and that's it. Whereas with the algorithm, it is a constant dialectical process. It trains me to train it, to train me, to train it, to train it. And so it's a relationship. It's not a one-way street. Moreover, and far more significantly, once the desire is in my heart, in my stomach, wherever it desires live, once it's there, then I only have to click a button and it comes to my home. I don't have to go to a shop. I don't have to go to McDonald's. I don't have to go to a bicycle shop. I don't have to go to anywhere. And the owner of this cloud capital, as I call it, which has this capacity directly to interface with me and learn from me and teach me how to make it learn so that it can actually create this desire in my heart, and not just one desire, but one desire after the other every 10 seconds. Okay? That same algorithm bypasses the market and delivers the product to my door directly, bypassing, I'll say this once more, bypassing markets. So Amazon.com, Alibaba, Airbnb, Uber, they are not markets. They are the equivalent of digital fiefdoms. They are trading platforms, right? So they look like markets and they can confuse you. They can make you think that it's a market because you've got millions of sellers in them and millions of buyers. So it's not a market? No, it's not a market. It is not a market. It is a trading platform with many buyers and many sellers. But that doesn't a market make. Let me bring it closer to your home, to Russia. As an avid student of Gosplan, of the Ministry of Economic Planning under the Soviet Union, I found what Gosplan tried to do, which is to replace the market, absolutely fascinating and very poignant. It was partly successful, largely unsuccessful, but let's not get bogged down in the discussion of the merits or demerits of Gosplan. Okay, the fact was that we had for decades a systematic attempt to create a trading platform which was not a market. Because when what was the whole, there was an algorithm. Gosplan ran an algorithm. It was done with pen and paper, not with computers so much. They did have computers too in the 1960s and 70s, but they were relatively unsophisticated, nothing like what Bezos has in Amazon, right? But there was an algorithm, and the idea was what? The idea was to collect information from different consumers, from different producers, and then say to the producer of black shoes, we want so many black shoes, right? And this is the price you're going to get. So this coming from the algorithm, from Gosplan, to the factories, to the producers. And then once the shoes were produced, there was matching between the consumers and the producers. So this was a market alternative. Its merits, demerits, let's not discuss them at this moment. Okay? What is Amazon? It is the wet dream of the Gosplan functionaries. If the Gosplan functionaries were alive today and looked at the algorithm of Amazon, they would think, my goodness, Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, if only we had that. Because it does beautifully that which Gospel was trying to do. Because if you and I, you have our tablet or phone or, our computer next to each other, let's suppose we are sitting, all of us now, we are sitting next to each other and we go into Amazon and we type the same word or the same product description, right? Some electric bicycle or binoculars or, an electric hair dryer or whatever. Yeah. Each one of us will get a different list of sellers to choose from. Each one of us. Because the machine, the algorithm, is matching producers and consumers using a particular cybernetic scheme called an algorithm. And it is optimized, the algorithm, for a particular purpose. Now, in the case of Gosplan, the purpose was to reach the targets of the 5-year plan set down by the plenary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Theoretically, it could even be consistent with social welfare across the Soviet Union. In the case of Bezos, we know what he's doing. The algorithm is optimized to maximize the rents that Bezos retains from each transaction. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, this is what I say. Welcome to Technofeodalism. This is no longer a capitalist market. Okay? And this has major repercussions in the way we conceptualize the circular flow of income, the production of values, the reproduction of capital, both the traditional terrestrial version or the cloud version, or analog and digital version, if you want, and also the way that the macroeconomy works. Because if I'm right in saying that, in my estimation, about 30% of global income, 30% of global income is now channeled in the form of cloud rent. Cloud rent, because it's not only Amazon, it's Alibaba, they're regional, national, such cloud fees. Increasingly, you have the substitution of traditional capitalist exchanges or market exchanges with these cloud thieves. So if around 30% of income is extracted from both producers and consumers, producers pay, whenever you buy something from Amazon or Alibaba, 40% of the price goes to the owner of the cloud capital, who doesn't produce it. Okay, it's a rent. Now, rent has never gone away. It was always part and parcel of capitalism, but not to that extent. Rent had been subsumed to the power of profit. Now you have the opposite. If you go to the New York Stock Exchange and you remove the cloudalist firms, the Magnificent Seven, from the New York Stock Exchange, well, nothing is left. Nothing is left. Even if you look at the military-industrial complex, I don't know whether you know that, but Peter Thiel's Palantir, which is another cloudalist enterprise, I call them cloudalist from Cloud Capital, or techno-feudal enterprise, if you want. Did you know that Palantir has a capitalization in the New York Stock Exchange which has surpassed that of Lockheed Martin, the company that produces F-35s and bombers and stuff? What does Palantir produce? Nothing, except for cloud power in the military-industrial complex sector. Increasingly, the war in Ukraine is being fought by AI. In the genocide in Palestine is being performed using cloud capital. And anyone who owns cloud capital has the power to extract lives, in the case of Palestine, but value. Now, here comes the utility of Marx in my thinking. Because if I didn't have Marx behind me, running in the background, as in a computer you have the operating system running in the background. This is my operating system, it's Marx. Okay, I would get confused, like a lot of people get confused, on what exactly is happening here, who's producing value, and where does the value come from? So I'm never, the argument of mine which really annoys the rightists who like my book, like Steve Bannon, is when I say that the techno-feudal sector or the cloudalist sector doesn't produce any value. Why? Because in Marxist analysis, value is only produced by wage labor or human labor. That's the labor theory of value. I remain absolutely anchored in the labor theory of value. So this whole techno-feudal system that extracts from global income 30% as cloud rent, all this cloud rent has not been produced within that sector. It has been produced in the traditional capitalist sector. So my theory is that there is under technofeudalism, technofeudalism like a huge parasite that sits on top of an increasingly shrinking capitalist sector. Power is concentrated in the hands not of the owners of the traditional capital in the traditional capital sector, which is producing the surplus value. No, but it sits now in the hands of the techno-feudal lords, or cloudalists, as I call them in the book, who own the cloud capital, which produces zero surplus value. What it does, it extracts it. And if I'm right in this, it's very easy to come to the next conclusion. And the next conclusion is that this system is even worse than capitalism, not in ethical terms, maybe in ethical terms too, but in purely Marxist terms, in the sense that the crises that it generates are much harsher, much greater, much more frequent. Why? Because all this value, which is extracted as cloud rent from the traditional shrinking capital sector, which is increasingly subservient to the techno-feudal, all this money is not reinvested into new capital. I mean, in the classical Marxist tradition, Marx, like Ricardo before him, assumes that all returns to capital, all profits, all the parts of the surplus value retained after the capital is paid for rent, for interest and so on, is reinvested. And that becomes capital accumulation. Right? So Marx assumes perfect capitalism, that there are no leakages, that there are no oligarchs who take the money and run with it. No, whatever they make, they reinvest in more capital because they are constantly struggling for survival, and they fear that if they don't invest, then they will lose out in the competition with other capitalists, and they will become proletarians. Right? So he's taking the best case scenario for capitalism to show that even if you have the best case, an ideal capitalism that never exists in real life, that you're going to end up with a falling rate of profit, periodic crisis, and so on. So imagine now, if you, in Marxist analysis, which is what I try to stick to, you throw in cloud capital and 30% of the income produced globally being siphoned off the capital accumulation process. And what capital accumulates comes in the form of cloud capital, which is not productive. Well, it's not difficult to see how that creates a far more crisis-prone system than capitalism was. More exploitative and more crisis-prone. And here's how I'm going to end. The next step is to look at the situation geopolitically, which Marx always did. He didn't just stick to his schemas of reproduction, to the analysis, the theory, and so on. He always tried to apply his thinking, his economics, on political economy, on what happens in India, what happens in Russia, and what happens in Bangladesh. He constantly wrote letters about the United States, about Africa, about Greece, for that matter, about all the places in the world that he knew even a little bit about. He tried to understand it. So when I look at the world through the lenses of my techno-feudal but Marxist hypothesis analysis, I suddenly start getting really jittery about the world we live in, because in writing this book and thinking about this book, I realized what I believe about the new Cold War between the United States and China. Russia is a big player it's a tiny little cog in this. The main confrontation is not between the United States and Russia. Trump has proven that recently. The main confrontation is between the United States and China. And the big fat question is, why did Trump 1.0, the first Trump, in 2016, 17, unleash his new Cold War against China? And when people say to me it's Taiwan, I laugh my head off because it's ludicrous. The idea that suddenly the Americans realized that China wants Taiwan. China always wanted Taiwan. This is not really completely not new. Indeed, when Nixon went to Beijing to kiss and make up with Mao Zedong, the first thing they agreed was the one China policy. Taiwan belongs to China. Okay, you're not going to invade, but okay, in theory, it's yours. So that's not the reason. The second reason that people say, oh, Trump was a crazy man. He was a madman. Well, okay, no argument there. Or either he's a madman or he pretends to be a madman. But if it's all down to Trump being a madman, why did Joe Biden, the moment he won in 2020, not only didn't he stop that new Cold War that that Trump had begun, but he turbocharged. He issued that CHIPS Act, or he supported it, and he sponsored it, and he pushed it through Congress, which effectively was a declaration of economic war against China, far worse than what Trump had done. And if Kamala Harris had won, she would have made that even worse. And the answer I give you, to cut a long story short, is that what changed since the mid-2010s and Washington, D.C. turned against China is the rise of cloud capital. Because there are only two countries in the world that have cloud capital, significant, substantial cloud capital. The United States and China. Europe has none. Russia has very little. Africa, the less we say, the better. So it is China and Silicon Valley in the United States. So if my Marxist analysis of the power of cloud capital and the rise of technofeudalism is correct, I'm not saying it is, if it is correct, then suddenly we have an explanation. Because you have two heavy concentrations of this uber powerful form of capital in America and in China. Now, why can't they be friends? And here's the reason, and this is how I'm going to stop. I'm going to have a discussion. The reason is that the only reason the United States is hegemonic, I mean, it's a destroyed country. Trump is absolutely right. It's carnage. If you go outside New York and San Francisco, I mean, it is a very sad story. I mean, the whole of the Midwest, the South, the North, you go to Wisconsin, it's a destroyed society. It's just, deaths of despair everywhere. People, have a minor illness and they go bankrupt because there is no health service. It's a disaster in the United States. And it's completely in the red, totally indebted, with a huge budget deficit, and gigantic debts. And yet it really doesn't matter. The more indebted it is, the higher its trade deficit, the more hegemonic it is. And why is this? Because of the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. And what is it that the Chinese big tech have that the American big tech do not have? They have the Chinese Communist Party that has forced Chinese banks to be completely integrated with big tech, with Chinese big tech. So if you have WeChat, this is a big tech, Chinese big tech app provided by a company called Tencent, big conglomerate in China. You have WeChat effectively. It doesn't matter where you have your bank account in China, which bank you have it with, you make free payments everywhere in one. That application can never exist in the United States. It's not a technological problem. It's that Wall Street will never allow big tech, Meta, Apple, to take over its monopoly over financial rents. So you can have Google Pay, Apple Pay, but you pay commissions whenever you use it in order to pay somebody who has a bank account with Citibank and your bank account is with Bank of America, even within Bank of America, the Bank of America clientele, you pay, because this is what Wall Street does. And that means that the payment system of the Chinese is spectacularly more attractive, fast, and useful than the European or the American one is. And why is this important? Well, it is important because now with the central bank digital currency and WeChat, okay, and the war in Ukraine, and the confiscation of $300 billion of the central Bank of Russia's money, now you have Emiratis, Arabs from the United Arab Emirates. You have people from Indonesia, people from Malaysia, people who know they're not good people. They know I've got billions. I'm not a good person, right? Um, a lot of it is looted. A lot of it is the result of illicit property rights. Okay, so the Americans confiscated the Russians' money, the Russian oligarchs' money. Maybe they will confiscate some of mine. So you hedge your bets, and you put some of it in the Chinese cloud finance. The combination of finance and cloud capital. And that is a clear and present danger to the monopoly of the dollar. And if the Americans lose this monopoly, that's it, finished. There's nothing going to, the collapse of the Roman Empire or of the Soviet Union will be a walk in the park compared to what will happen when the United States collapses. So this is why they're waging a new Cold War. Anyway, I'm trying to relate to you how my Marxist thinking, which remains, I think, 100% Marxist, erratic like he was, but Marxist nevertheless, has spewed this idea about technofeudalism and how I, increasingly through this method, I've been understanding the world. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and maybe the world works very, very differently. But I can tell you that I get a lot of pleasure, and not just pleasure, but self-confidence, when I see people in Wall Street, people in the Trump White House, coming to me and saying, yeah, what you're saying is interesting. Because in the end, Marx wrote the best textbook for capitalists. Except that the capitalists take the Marxist analysis, turn it on its head, and use it against the proletariat. Okay? No serious capitalist ever believes neoclassical economics, because neoclassical economics is utterly useless to them. It describes a world that doesn't exist, whereas Marx describes capitalism as it is. So if you are going to Henry Ford, Westinghouse, Thomas Edison, Elon Musk, they are true Marxists. Not ideologically, not ethically, maybe not consciously. Some of them consciously too, except they use the analysis in order to exploit more and in order to make the world a far worse place. We should be doing the opposite. Thank you.
Dear Professor, thank you very much for this fascinating talk. And I guess your last point were very striking. And many things you have mentioned, of course, they are relevant not only to the US, but also to Russia, where also some cloud platforms were used by the regime. And now we have some questions in the chat. I will read them for you. So the first question is from Andrei. Nowadays, there is a political third in left accelerationism. In manifesto of left accelerationism, there is a point which is devoted to problem of capitalist platform, and the main idea concludes in a capitalism which could overcome itself because of own progressive forces. First of all, because of informational and technological innovations. How we can imagine this process from the perspective of left, if capitalism captures our reality and interprets it through its own narrative, such as economic phenomenon of post-Fordist era? Can we say that technofeudalism is one of type of post-capitalism?
Well, by definition, what does post-capitalism mean? Something that comes after capitalism. This is my thesis. My thesis is that we are now at a phase, at a socioeconomic mode of production, which is after capitalism, in the same way that capitalism is post-feudalism, if you want. Look, in the end, what we label the systems we live under is important, but only from the perspective of motivating us to think more clearly. So suppose, Marina, that you and I were, or all of us here, we were, this was the, 1776, let's say, right? And we were all in some cafeteria in Moscow or in London or in Paris, and we were having a chat about the state of the world. This is 1776, folks, right? Wherever you look, you see feudalism. Wherever you look, especially in Russia, but not only Russia, in the West, in Western Europe as well. You look at the seats of government. It's lords, barons, earls, landed gentry. It's feudal, and yet the seed of capitalism had already been planted, and the system had already shifted, especially in places like Britain, its architecture towards a capitalist architecture. Now, let's say that we were smart enough and we were well informed enough in that cafeteria to know that. And let's say we got involved in a discussion about accelerationism, about this, about the other, and also about the nomenclature. That is what we call the system. Now, one of us could very easily get up and say, I think that the system that we now live in is a form of industrial feudalism. Yeah? Would it be wrong? No, it wouldn't be wrong. 1776, even when Marx and Engels were writing the Communist Manifesto, you could still very credibly describe Europe as a kind of a system of industrial feudalism. It wouldn't be wrong. Calling it something else, not not simply attaching an epithet to the word capitalism, and not saying, oh, it's another phase, the latest phase of feudalism. And calling it capitalism concentrated the mind. It forced us to understand that, you know what, folks, girls and boys, something significant has happened here. This is not business as usual with a different slant and so on. So I think that's how we should approach it and not get too immersed into our own vocabulary, which, let's say, especially, I'm sure that most of you are academics, right? I mean, you're all scholars, you're all students, you're all intellectuals. The problem with intellectuals, and I count myself in this, is that, we invest too much in our own terms of reference, in our own little petty, not petty, pet theories, I should say. And then it's very difficult to extricate ourselves from that. But we must. Because if it is true, I'm not sure it is true. I'm saying I believe it is, but you've got to make your own minds up. If it is true that this is a turning point in terms of the socioeconomic mode of production, we can't afford to be stuck in the terms of reference which we have regurgitated as students, as academics, and so on. We have to look at the concrete reality and to make sure that our terms reflect the concrete reality and not the reproduction of our own myths and our own models.
Thank you very much for an answer. So now I will transfer the word to Konstantin, who raised his hand. Please, could you?
Yes. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much, first of all, Yanis, for your clear, well-formulated and precise lecture. And thank you for your work in general. And, for me, you're not like an example of Marxist heretic, but I think also the great example of the person who are very well and formulated, let's say, left common sense. And I'm really appreciate it. And so my question is actually, what do you think about progress? What is, progressive for you today? Is it forward or backward movement? Because like unpack it really, really fast, it seems, that all of this accelerationist and techno-positive thought now, as you said, has led us into techno-feudalism. But what if we go backwards? Yes, and is all we have left to do is, conservatively defend the Keynesian welfare state? And so, how should we move to be progressive? And should we? And then can we still draw some inspiration from the ideas of left-wing accelerationism or not? That's my questions.
I never had that much time for accelerationism. I always consider it to be a stale source of thinking. As for Keynesianism, it's finished. As is social democracy. There was a moment in history when, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, but that's only because we had the Bretton Woods system, which maintained stability and ensured that political power could ameliorate and could temper the power of capital. Look, on the question of progress, we've all read our Walter Benjamin, who warned about progress. Every time he heard of progress, he thought, okay, there is another genocide hiding behind it. And it's true. It is true. But at the same time, it is important to maintain hope, to maintain the hope that something better is possible. Now, for me, the definition of progress is really very simple. It's exactly that. The idea that something better is possible. And of course, in order to be able to talk about what is better, you have to have a notion of what is good. I don't believe that you can define good in mathematical terms. I'm not a utilitarian who has a function that is maximized. And when U goes up, utility goes up, things are better. And when it goes down, things are worse. Because I'm a dialectical materialist, if you want. Right? So I say this at the beginning of my book, Technofeodalism. My father, when I was 6, 7, introduced me to the wonders and the horrors of technology. Okay? And he taught me from the very first day when he introduced me to, he was a metallurgist, to how metals, metal technology has powered history. So how the age of iron sped up history. Is that accelerationism? Not necessarily, because at the same time, my father was pointing out to the horrors that age of iron, and that's why I mentioned Hesiod, who lamented the coming of the age of iron, in the same way that people lament AI today, or lamented the steam engine some time ago, or electricity before that. So, in very old-fashioned Marxist terms, for me, it is quite beautiful how the human mind, through its incapacity not to be inventive, pushes forward technology, the technological frontier. And that can mean wonderful things and can be genocide. Horrible things, like, the annihilation of the human race through nuclear or through climate catastrophe, So it's what we do with the technology. So we have this, like organisms in a Darwinian process mutate. And this is beautiful because suddenly you have a new species. Human creativity is the mutation that pushes forward the development and the evolution of the means of production. Then, because they are developing much faster, the technological means, the means of production, than social relations of production, which are relatively ossified, okay, then you have a clash. And the clash concerns who, as Lenin would say, who does what to whom, using these new technological tools. So, depending on how that clash proceeds, and whether it is the improvement of the human condition or the opposite that succeeds, then we can lament or celebrate. And in the end, it's up to us collectively to work out what the good is. Nobody can define the good or the better. Anybody who thinks that they can do it through a textbook are utterly deluded or Stalinist, okay, or fascist. The beauty about the good is that none of us have a clue of what it means, but together we can crowdsource the meaning of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dear Professor, I hope you still have a little bit time to answer some more questions.
Let's say another 10 minutes, Marina,
Okay.
because then I have to
So,
connect South Africa
Yeah.
or Palestine?
I guess we will have then two questions, and one is from the chat, and then Andrei will ask his question. What are the advantages of your concept of techno-feudalism compared to similar frameworks like surveillance capitalism by Zubov or techno-libertarianism by Galumbe? What are the most significant differences from your point of view?
Okay, let's start with Zubov's surveillance capitalism. Well, I don't believe what we have is capitalism. And I believe that this book by Shoshana Zuboff is a very useful book to understand 1/3 of the reality that is evolving. And that's not bad. Understanding 1/3 of any reality is very useful, right? But let me juxtapose the way I understand things from the way Shoshana Zuboff is understanding the world. She's talking about a new form of creating monopoly power. So advertising was always about manufacturing desire. So when Adam Smith was writing, he'd never imagined that our desires could be manufactured by capitalist firms. The idea was that you have a desire for bread, for meat, for whatever, which was autonomous, it was your own desire. And then it was a question of finding the best mechanism, and for him it was a marketplace, for matching ends with means and satiating those desires. With advertising, we know that especially after the Second World War, when the American capitalist machinery was so productive as a result of the war effort, as a result of the war economy, that they could produce a lot more cars than Americans with the money could afford, wanted to buy. So they had to create the desire for the car. They had to create the desire for the McDonald's hamburger and so on. So, and the more they created this desire for McDonald's, the greater the monopoly power of McDonald's over us, and the greater its capacity to extract monopoly rents. Okay? So Shoshana Zuboff takes this further and says, when you have surveillance through your phone, through your tablet, and so on, and they can target advertisements at you, and they can harvest your data, then the cloud capital, what I call cloud capital, this algorithm, enhances the power of the producer, of the manufacturer, who sells you this stuff. Well, I don't think this is what happens, is going on. Remember what I was saying? When you enter Amazon, you've got a variety of different kinds of exploitation or extraction. Amazon extracts your data, surveillance, in order to be able to modify your behavior, that we have in common with Zuboff, right? But it extracts rents from the producers. So the producers are lured into Amazon, whether they are producing cars, bicycles, or books, or indeed news stories, publishers are lured into Facebook, into Amazon, and so on. They are given a good opportunity to sell us stuff. But once they're in there and their business model has adapted to these cloud thieves, then the owners of the cloud capital destroy them. They absolutely destroy them. Suddenly they tweak their algorithms. So the producer, the capitalist producer inside Amazon, inside Facebook, suddenly they lose 80% of their sales because the algorithm doesn't show us customers what they are selling. And then they go to so they call Facebook, they call Zuckerberg, they say, what's happening? We lost 80% of our, they say, oh, you want to go up to be up there again? Okay, give me 40% of your profits. So it's not just surveillance, and it's not just harvesting our data. And the fundamental difference I have with Zuboff, for instance, she doesn't understand the algorithm. She doesn't want to accept it. She doesn't understand. We had this debate, and I have not managed to convince her. It's not that she doesn't know my hypothesis. She doesn't understand this is a new form of capital, what I call cloud capital. And if you don't have this concept that capital is the source of power, which you only get if you're a Marxist, and she's not, then you don't see the full gamut of the operations of capital, especially of cloud capital. Now, techno-libertarianism, come on, folks, do you care about anything that is libertarian? I mean, libertarians are, at best, tragic figures because, remember one of the great libertarians, Friedrich von Hayek, used to say, and I think that was a good point that he made, criticizing us leftists. He said the problem with socialists is they will have to do things that go against the principles of socialists in order to introduce socialism. And we saw this in the Soviet Union. We saw it almost everywhere where we tried socialism. But this is exactly the problem that the libertarians have. In order to push forward their freedom, they need a totalitarian state. Think of Thatcher. I mean, I cut my teeth as a young person living in Britain under Margaret Thatcher. And in pursuit of her great libertarian project, she created a totalitarian state that Stalin would be very, very proud of.
Thank you very much. And Andriy, if you could very briefly ask your question, so please proceed, but please very briefly.
I'll do my best. And so, Professor Varakas, thank you for the lecture and for the presentation. The question is somewhat related to what you just said, because I've been in the industry, in the cloud industry, for a bit over a decade. And the mainstream argument that I receive when criticizing the way the industry is evolving, the world is evolving, has been that this is aligned with the practice of vertically integrated companies and the evolution which you already mentioned Peter Thiel. There was his book where he mentioned the concept of effective monopolies, of natural monopolies, the monopolies that produce ultimate good. So that's the argument that a lot of people make. And ultimately, this goes aligned with the evolution of capitalistic enterprise with intensification of the capital and ultimate growth in scope and in breadth. So how does the techno-feudalism concept beat the concept of these kind of oligopoly as the ultimate state of the modern economy, where select very large enterprises control very big percentage of the national wealth versus fiefdom as you presented? Thank
you. To answer as succinctly as I can, I think it's interesting to compare and contrast two great capitalists. Take, for instance, Henry Ford. Take Henry Ford, who was one of these people that you're referring to. Monopoly power, cornering the market, using his monopoly rents to buy newspapers in order to pressurize politicians, to rip out streetcars and public transport so that people would buy his cars, okay, and drive around in Chicago and so on. Take Henry Ford, right? And take Jeff Bezos, another capitalist. They're equally megalomaniac, equally nasty people. Henry Ford was not a very nice person, nor is Jeff Bezos. They're egomaniacs, there's no doubt about that. He also bought a newspaper, the Washington Post, to carry favor with various authorities. So in that sense, so far I'm agreeing with you, right? I mean, what's the difference? One has created not a natural monopoly, but a monopoly through economies of scale and economies of scope, and so has the other. I'll tell you what the fundamental difference is what kind of capital they own. Henry Ford owned traditional produced means of production. He had his huge production lines. He introduced Fordism, after all. And his machines produced other machines that he wanted you to buy. Cars, buses, tanks, and so on, right? What is Jeff Bezos producing? Absolutely nothing. He's not producing that because his capital is not productive. His capital is not a produced means of production. It's a produced means of modifying your behavior. So he's not even a monopolist. Because a monopolist, and try to imagine this, imagine a Western, a Far West movie, right? You and I are riding into a town, and we find that typical, Far West town, and we discover, as in Clint Eastwood movies and so on, that this town is owned by one man. he owns every shop, the saloon bar, the sheriff. Okay? Still, you and I, Andre, as we're walking around that town, we can talk to one another. We can decide to boycott this man's town or this man's shop. Okay? This man is selling us stuff that his companies are producing, whether it's whiskey or I don't know what, saddles. Okay? With Jeff Bezos, in Jeff Bezos' universe, it is as if we're walking together, side by side. And when you look at something, you look at a shop, and I look at the same shop, we see different products. Because there is an algorithm that controls our eyes, what we see. And the owner of this digital fiefdom doesn't produce any of that stuff, doesn't give a damn about what we buy, as long as we buy it from him and he collects a rent. Now, that is a profound difference, especially given that it has completely replaced the market, and it has made sure that profits have been shrunk because all the surplus value is collected in the form of rent. That is not a monopoly. It's not even a monopoly. And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand the difference, the profound, fundamental, radical difference between Henry Ford and Jeff Bezos, and we simply think that they are just different versions of monopoly capital, then we have completely missed the essence of the system we live in.
Thank you very much for this profound answer. So thank you very much for joining us today. And we will contact you also later and give you some other questions which people left in the chat. So thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
And do with the recording anything you want. If you want to share it, do what you want.
Okay, thank you very much for
transparency. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wish I could meet you in person, this cloud capital intermediation.
Yes,
Japan.
we could think about it. Yeah, and we will get in touch later, I think. Yes. Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.